Here we go on the toss.
First and 10.
Get it, buddy.
Sweet.
Nice. Yeah, he's not going out of bounds. No way.
One tackle and gets
Yeah, he ran hard.
Deep crossing.
Nice cut.
One man miss.
Yeah, he was solid.
30.
He was solid.
And a good run there to the Giant 27-yard line.
The first preseason game is in the books, a 14-3 loss on a rainy night to the New York Giants. But there was some positive to pull out of it. Welcome back to the channel. I am your host, Johnny Gaz. Thank you for returning for another video. We're going to open up a new series on the channel. Today we're going to look at the winners and losers from the Detroit Lions' first preseason game. Let's go. Before we get into those studs and duds, make sure to hit the like button on the video if you dig the vibe here at Johnny Gaz Sports. The subscription button and notify bell is the best way to make sure you don't miss any future videos here on the channel. We do have a membership option now available. If you hit the join button on any one of my videos, I'll walk you through all the options you have to become a part of the family. Thank you guys so much for the recent interaction, all the commenting. Talking Lions football with you guys as we get closer and closer to the regular season has been so much fun. Thank you. Let's get into today's topic. Let's start with some injury updates. I think the biggest one is Hendon Hooker. It is now a confirmed concussion. Dan Campbell came out and said he did have his bell rung on one of the runs that he had in the third quarter. So just prior to the fourth quarter, he did go in and is now under concussion protocol. Hopefully, he will be healthy enough to come back for the next preseason game. Him, along with Antoine Green, as we know, also suffered a concussion. That was going into the first half. Unfortunately, was going in for a block and also got his bell run there. Some more serious injuries coming out of the first preseason game. Offensive tackle Connor Galvin was rolled up on, and it is now a confirmed torn MCL. He is going to go in for surgery and will be placed on season-ending IR. On the other side of the football, another unfortunate injury to defensive tackle David Bada. He has an Achilles injury that Dan Campbell has said will be long-term. We will wait for an official designation on that one. A few minor injuries to note. James Houston suffered a bone bruise. Safety Maurice Norris, a hamstring. Those two are both day-to-day. And one coming out recently is defensive end Nate Lynn, who they said was also taken off the field sometime during that game with an unknown shoulder injury. I will keep you updated as we hear word on that one. As we talked about in the game review we did just after the conclusion of that first preseason game, we got to remember to take these preseason games with a grain of salt. The Lions do not play any of their starters, and this year really didn't play any of their key backups as well. So you have second and third string depth guys competing for roster spots, and the Lions are really looking to see how to build this roster, how to ultimately get to a Super Bowl. So they're really testing guys, trying different things within the scheme. So you got to remember that losing the game 14-3 really isn't the big picture. It's more about what can we pull out of the game, and that's why we dive into winners and losers here out of the first preseason game for the Lions. Let's start with who I believe to be the ultimate winner coming out of this first preseason game, and that is backup quarterback Hendon Hooker. Now, we opened up this with the injury update, and we'll have to kind of see what this concussion and what the protocol means for him. It will be very key that he gets back for the remainder of the majority of this preseason, hopefully before this next preseason game, because I think the more snaps, the better. And I think he came out of the first game looking really, really good. I'm not going to say he was fantastic or perfect. You have to remember that this is a very simplified scheme here in the preseason, especially for Hendon Hooker, who they know they're trying to build confidence. They're trying to get him as many reps as possible and build him into the quarterback that they'd like him to be, ultimately a backup to Jared Goff. And I think in looking at the big picture, he certainly looked the part here in his first action in several years coming off of Tennessee and several injuries. Yes, again, it was simplified, but the Lions moved the football when he was at the helm. That's the truth, because they did not move the football with the other gentleman here that we'll talk about here in a moment. Ultimately, Hendon Hooker, I thought, looked confident. He looked in control, and he finished 5 of 9 for 36 yards passing and actually led the team with rushing as well with 4 carries at 34 yards. Again, we'll keep our ears to the ground as far as what will happen with this concussion. I'll certainly keep you updated here on the channel. Perhaps one of the biggest reasons Hendon Hooker looks so good is because the other backup quarterback looks so bad. I think one of the ultimate losers coming out of this first preseason game is backup quarterback Nate Sudfeld. He just didn't look comfortable the whole game. He was truly lost anytime he got any sort of pressure. He could not work through the progressions, and it just didn't look confident. He's almost 30 years old, so he really doesn't have a ton of athleticism, especially in comparison to Hendon Hooker. So did he play bad enough to where the Lions now have to consider bringing in another quarterback? Nate Sudfeld finished 13 of 24 for 96 yards. He had the one interception, which of course then ended up in a fumble recovery by the Lions, and he was sacked 3 times. And I'm sure he didn't expect to have to come back in the game after the Hendon Hooker injury, but you expected more out of him. And unfortunately, I think he was the biggest loser here for this first preseason game. Let's go back to the winners and stay on the offensive side of the football. I think the second biggest winner coming out of this first preseason game is running back, jack of all trades, Sione Vaki. The Lions drafted him because of his versatility, but I think you're now seeing what he can truly provide even in the run game. We opened up this video with his dynamic 15-yard run, and he really sparked the Lions offense there in the second quarter. There was not much to write home about in the run game, but he was able to produce. One of the only players there in that backup running back role to produce in this game. He ended up finishing with 4 carries for 29 yards, and he was the player that recovered that fumble coming off of the Nate Sudfeld interception. The one thing I don't think we've really seen out of him yet, and maybe we'll get that towards the other preseason games, is what can he give in special teams as far as a returner. You know, we'll talk about one of the other losers of the game, but I think where Sione Vaki may come into play is as that second kickoff returner along with maybe Khalif Raymond. So it'll be interesting to see sort of overall what he gives to the Lions, but I know they're very excited about him, and I was excited to see what he gave in this first preseason game. Another loser for me coming out of this first preseason game is in the secondary on the defensive side of the football, safety Maurice Norris, and I think this is stemming from what were obvious misplays on his part. And, you know, he gave up what, in my opinion, was a tough missed tackle on the Eric Gray first touchdown, the 48-yard run. I mean, you see it right here on the thumbnail. Unfortunately, with the weather conditions and Eric Gray making a very nice cutback after what was kind of a big hole getting through the defensive line there, Maurice Norris was just not able to make the play. This combined with, you know, giving up an 18-yard reception to, tight end Tyree Jackson, which almost resulted in a touchdown. That resulted in Eric Gray's second 1-yard touchdown of the day. It was unfortunate series of plays that were very clearly spotlighted on Maurice Norris. And when you look at him combined with how good the rest of the secondary played, I thought, you know, really the rest of them played really well the majority of the game, especially with the rookies coming in, Enos Rakestraw, Terrion Arnold. You had Amik Robertson. They all kind of showed themselves early on the game. Well, unfortunately, as a depth piece, Maurice Norris, with these plays kind of stacking up, it's going to be difficult for him to make the roster. So unfortunately, I did have him as one of my ultimate losers here of this first preseason game. Let's jump back over to the winners and head over to the defensive side of the football. Maybe the biggest surprise coming out of this first preseason game is of defensive end Isaac Ukwu. He was all over the field. He had a sack. He made a nice defensive stuff on a short run in the second half, had multiple pressures, and really seemed to overwhelm the backup offensive tackles for the Giants. I mean, what a surprise. I have not mentioned this guy's name the entire preseason, and here he is flashing in the first preseason game. We've gone over and over again the help that they need for Hutch, what will ultimately make the Lions' defensive better, and that's being able to build depth on the defensive line. And if you can get a guy like Isaac Ukwu to flash and continue to show himself and give you something as they head into the regular season, again, that's just gravy on top of everything else that they've done this offseason to improve that unit. So to me, the biggest surprise winner of this game was defensive end Isaac Ukwu. And the third loser for the Lions in this first preseason game, I thought, was Maurice Alexander, a guy that I think they're hoping to get something out of for their special teams. I think Maurice Alexander has kind of proven that he's not necessarily going to be able to get himself into the wide receiver rotation, so his best bet to make this team was as a punt returner, kick returner, or on special teams. And unfortunately, it was another situation where it was just spotlighted with bad plays here in this first preseason game. He ended up fumbling the first punt return attempt that he had. On top of that, on the second one, he had a opportunity to make a fair catch and probably trying to do too much coming off of that fumble. He also lost control of that second one, which they were able to recover, so they didn't turn the ball over. But again, he's not an offensive weapon, so his only shot is on special teams. And with these types of plays coming out of this first preseason game, I think he's put himself behind the 8 ball. So unfortunately, he did find himself on my loser list coming out of the first preseason game. And just a few honorable mentions. Let's start on the loser side of things. I want to mention Giovanni Manu, and I think he was kind of thrust into more work in this first preseason game because of the injuries on the offensive line. We know Connor Galvin we talked about up front on this video. I don't know if Giovanni Manu really showed himself a ton in this first preseason game. Some of that to be expected. He's still young, raw, and a project. But what shined to me was the false start penalty that he got on that third down at the end of the second quarter as they were finally driving to get their first score. That they ended up getting that first down, so it didn't hurt them too much, but it's just it's a huge red flag, especially I know for the Lions coaches. They really talk about discipline and, doing the smart things, making the smart play, and unfortunately in that case that shined through. Some other players to mention, I think Reese Fountain, he just wasn't able to separate himself. They did try to get him the ball in the second quarter, but weren't successful, and that may be because he wasn't able to provide that separation, and then the cornerbacks really made a couple good plays on him. So he had no catches, really no stat line in this first game. And then two players who I think they're just not getting enough out of as we get closer to the regular season is Donovan Peoples-Jones, who had the missed catch in the end zone. He did have the 120-some-odd yard catch, which was nice. Good to see him use his hands and his strength a little bit, but there's just not enough of that. And that was a guy in DPJ you expected to not only make the roster, but compete for that third wide receiver spot. And right now, I think he's trailing. Another player in that same position, I think, is James Houston. And he saw a lot of time over the first preseason game, but I just don't think he's flashing enough compared to the player they thought they had from the guy that he was in 2022 before these injuries. So a few guys there in DPJ and James Houston that I think they're really looking to see some more of as they head further into this preseason. On the winner side of things, as it comes to honorable mentions, I think we got to start with the rookie cornerbacks, mainly Enos Rakestraw. Yes, him and Terrion Arnold both got the start, and really they held their own. I thought their starting secondary, or at least the secondary that played to start this game, looked really good. Malik Neighbors was not a factor. They forced a turnover. I think there were a lot of good things. Enos Rakestraw especially looked very confident. He looked faster on the field than a lot of people would sell him as, and I think he did very well. I think we also have to mention the Jake Bates field goal. Yes, it was just one attempt, but it was in the conditions, and it was over 50 yards, 53-yarder, and we talked about him needing to be lights out in the preseason. He has started off on a good foot, no pun intended. I think we also have to mention Broderick Martin. I wouldn't be surprised if you see him in much more limited time now for the rest of the preseason. To me, I think he's proven himself as a force, as a guy that can make a difference in the middle of that defensive line, and they need more and more of that. Behind Aleem McNeil, behind DJ Reader, hopefully recovering from injury, I think Broderick Martin is now starting to show himself, and he did so in this preseason game. Lastly, I want to mention as honorable mention is Isaiah Williams. He had 4 catches in this first preseason game. I think he was the best out of the wide receivers and really now put himself in a position where he can compete for that third wide receiver spot. So that's going to do it for our winners and losers coming out of the first preseason game for the Detroit Lions. What did you think? Did I hit on them all? Did I miss any winners, any losers? Anybody else that you want to bring up? Definitely hit me up in the comments. Talking Lions football with you guys is a true passion of mine. It is so much fun. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming along for another video. Make sure to hit that like button if you dug what we did here today. That subscription button, the notify bell, again, the best way to make sure you don't miss any future videos. We'll have game reviews coming up after all of the preseason games as well as the regular season. I can't wait to get into it with you guys. The Lions will pick up on their training camp starting Sunday, August 11th, and then their next preseason game will be the following Saturday against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I'm sure we'll have several videos coming up throughout this week in preparation for that next preseason game. Again, thank you guys so much for all your time. More than anything, make sure to take care of yourself and your mental health. That is number one. And I certainly want to make sure you guys come back and see me on future videos. Thank you guys again. Have a fantastic day.